Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Employer Branding webinar by Employer Branding South Africa. We're very excited to be hosting this webinar today, and I'm in the fortunate position to have the entire talent management team from Momentum Metropolitan. They are all seasoned individuals in their own disciplines, and if anyone doesn't know who Momentum Metropolitan is, they are one of the largest financial services providers and in fact employ 16,000 employees in their workforce. So you can imagine that these individuals' work is certainly cut out for them. The topic we're going to be covering today is around building an attractive employer brand. And it's about how do we build an attractive employer brand post-COVID, in the post-COVID world. For those of you who don't know who Employer Branding South Africa is, we are a consultancy who specializes in advisory and the crafting and building of employer brands to ensure that the employer value propositions are in fact relevant for these times, with a view to engaging and retaining foremost, and then obviously attracting the right talent. So we work with many South African and employer brands, and in fact moving nicely into the African regions as well. But for the purpose of today's webinar, the reason I have chosen Momentum Metropolitan is the fact that they can relate to the nuances within our labor market. And I think it's very imperative to understand that. The people that I've got on my panelists today, I would like to introduce you to. The first person is Dr. Cecile Bernardi. And her focus area is on employee insights as well as employer value proposition, and how Momentum Metropolitan is tailoring it around the new world of work. The second person is Chantal van der Westhuizen. This lady is responsible for the group learning portfolio, and you can imagine how big that is. It's digital learning that she is looking after, and obviously that's a huge area of focus for many organizations. Lynn has got an equally demanding role in that she's responsible for human capital, and more specifically on the Metropolitan side, where you've got your people, your financial advisors that are interfacing on the forefront. And that is her focus area. If you didn't meet Dieter on my last presentation, he is the Group Human Capital Executive, and he looks after the people effectiveness within Momentum Metropolitan. So welcome to all of you, and they are all, as I say, seasoned experts in their specific fields. So I would like to begin, first of all, by just giving you a little bit of background on the kind of insights that have come through from a recent 2020 Gartner survey, which I found to be quite interesting. And these individuals will be speaking around these topics as that relates to the Momentum Metropolitan environment. The first factor is that 82% of the respondents in a research survey that was conducted confirmed that employees are actually working remotely. And they're quite happy for this to happen, but there is still certain trials and tribulations that relate to, first of all, the training factor. The training factor in a sense that half of global workers are saying that they are not fully trained and in fact equipped to be able to be working remotely and be able to deliver competently. And they feel that they're shortchanged in terms of the training capability that they require to work in a remote environment. The second thing is the aspect around trust. And trust is a big factor because you've got employees that are saying, please trust me to deliver in the workplace. And it's not really about timekeeping, but it's about the outputs and being able to deliver competently. You've got leaders saying there's so much disruption in the home front. How are you able to deliver as well as if you're in a workplace environment? And then the other thing is around boundaries as well. Boundaries that are very difficult to establish. And this is coming through quite strongly in terms of employees, conscientious employees working from home and finding it very difficult to switch off. And switching off is difficult in the sense that burnout is happening and people are starting to wither quite badly and getting quite frazzled at the edges. The impact of the psychological well-being and the financial stability and the mental capability that's happening, or not capability, but the feeling that people have at the moment in terms of belonging and wanting to establish whether they still have a purpose, having worked away from home remotely. And these things are still taking their toll and playing havoc a bit with the mental capability and mental stability. Upskilling and competency has been seen through the survey as also being a strong focus area. And in fact, it is something that has come up consecutively through the research that Gartner has conducted, with 68% of organizations saying they're making a deliberate effort to, in fact, start looking at focusing on this area. Talent acquisition is actually an interesting space as well. And companies are starting to question the whole thing around higher degrees versus power skills and behaviors that are becoming so much more prevalent, especially if you've got people working from home, and there needs to be a level of self-management, self-discipline, timekeeping, communications, and those kind of things. And the whole world of resources is also opened up. There's no boundaries in terms of recruiting across borders and across countries as well now. So companies are starting to have a look at the gig, freelance and contractor profile of the new alternate workforce, as they call it. EVP relevance, employer value proposition relevance, has also been in the limelight in terms of the shift that companies have had to make in order to address how relevant they really are as an employer. And in fact, it was cited that 65% of candidates are actually opting out the hiring process as they are going through applying for a job if they feel that the EVP holds no relevance, whether it be due to continuous learning, whether it be due to work-life balance, whether it be flexibility or even culture. And then last but not least, 88% of organizations are saying that they actually have not made a good enough effort to put a diversity and inclusion strategy in place, with your leadership bench actually not receiving the focus that it should be receiving. So those are the kind of sort of insights that I gleaned from the latest 2020 research that came through the Gartner survey. And based on that, it'll be interesting now to chat to the panelists from Momentum and hear what they have to say in the context of the organization. Acknowledging now that we've had the trials and tribulations, it's been a roller coaster ride, we're now going to talk about looking ahead, because that is what it's all about. It's about looking forward into 2021 and saying, how are we actually going to look in 2021, and what does this new COVID world look like? So I'm finished speaking now. The house rules is really very much, and sorry, I should have actually set the scene here before I started going into the research, is really, as you can see, it's an informal discussion. There's no formal presentation. It's about me asking questions to the panelists and them asking and bringing to the forefront practicalities of what happens in the workplace within Momentum Metropolitan. So I'd like to start first with Dr. Cecile Bernardi. And as I said, this is her strength. The EVP and Employee Insights is her strength. And Cecile, what I'd like you to do is just give our audience or our community an understanding on how do you believe employer value proposition practices are going to change, and what kind of shift are we seeing from wellness to a more holistic well-being of the employee workforce?
Thank you, Celeste, and thank you to everyone for the opportunity to talk to you today and to share some thoughts. Yeah, so definitely I think, Celeste, a very valuable and an important point and question that you are raising. If you just listen to some of the research that you've shared just now, the reality is that I think EVP practices need to shift, and we definitely need to move towards more of a holistic wellbeing approach. So I think maybe to answer the question, I guess a good starting point is just to say that when we talk about EVP, what do we refer to? So I think if we talk about Momentum Metropolitan, we believe that our EVP really is the unique value that we offer to our organization and to our employees. So how do we create a place or an organization where people feel valued, where people feel engaged, and ultimately that allows us to become an employer and a place where people want to work, and that is attractive to talent. And there's a whole host of benefits and experiences, I think, that all contributes towards this feeling and this creation of an employee value proposition. I think if you have to think about traditionally what is EVP about, then I think one of the first thoughts that comes to mind is, I think for a very long time, there was a perception that EVP is one standard offering that we make available to all of our employees, and it's almost a little bit of you take what we give, and this is what's on the table. And I think in the new world of work that we are moving into and that we are already finding ourselves in, the reality very much is that we cannot be everything to everyone. And I think that's one of our biggest realizations. And I think therefore for us, the question is to say, what is it that we really want to achieve? Who is the key talent segments that we want to be attractive for? And what are the things that we need to put in place to really allow us to be attractive to those talent segments? And when we do that, how do we allow choice for people in terms of what is it that I need for me, or that is valuable for me in my career journey? So as an example, if I join a new organization, or if I join Momentum Metropolitan, and I've got a certain career aspiration or a certain growth plan, what does that look like for me? And to what extent do I have choice in terms of how I grow and where I grow, and what avenues is available? And I definitely think that's one of the big shifts when we talk about EVP. One of the big things that we need to take into consideration. And I think what probably goes hand in hand with that is just the reality that you mentioned and that the positioning now around work becoming more remotely and talent now being able to work from anywhere and from everywhere. And I think with that, there's a definite change in EVP that needs to happen, because suddenly it's not about a workforce that all goes into an office building and come together every day, but I can now log on from anywhere and everywhere. So I think just if you think about some traditional offerings that used to sit in an EVP, people very often talked about what services are available in the workplace. And is there a nice canteen or a nice coffee shop? And suddenly those things become a little bit less relevant. For me now, it's not necessarily about what restaurant or facilities are available, but am I set up to properly work from home? And do I have a stable internet connection or a fiber line? And I think those are some of the types of things that we will need to consider and that we will need to think about when we think about EVP. So I think that's the one part of the answer, specifically around EVP practices. I guess there's a lot more that we can say, but I think from a time perspective, I'm going to limit myself. What I do want to also touch on is just your question around the move from wellness to a more holistic well-being approach. And I definitely think that is critical for us to set any organization up for success. I think wellness has always been important, and a lot has been written about it if you look in the research. But I also think that traditionally, and if you have to go and look at what was written, there tended to be a very strong focus on the mental wellness component and what employee assistance programs do we offer to our employees. And that definitely is something that will remain relevant and will remain critical. And I think for us as Momentum Metropolitan, that is definitely something that we invest in heavily, is to say, how do we support our people and what care and what services are available? But we also realize that wellness or well-being then needs to be wider than just that. And with that, I think there's a couple of things that we can think about. So when we talk about different wellness or aspects impacting my individual wellness, then things like financial wellness is something that is important. And as an organization that wants to empower and support our clients and businesses and communities to really achieve success and to achieve financial well-being, I think that's something that we also need to make sure that we get in place and we allow and offer to our own employees, and physical wellness as well. So definitely, I think on an individual level, need to look at well-being more holistically. But I think we also need to, as part of that, consider the environment that employees function within and operate within. And I think what is important for us is to what extent do we understand how employees experience our working environment, and what are the factors that contributes to either making it a great place for them to work or take away from that experience, and how do we stay in touch and in tune with what that is and how employees experience that. So maybe just something that I can mention is, as an organization, we've started a couple of years ago to roll out an annual climate survey to really just allow us to get a sense of where our employees find themselves at and how they experience the working environment. And I think we got very valuable insights from that. But what we also realized in the last year is that we cannot only do that every 2 years. It's important for us to, on a regular basis, check in with where our employees are at and allow us to say, what are the things that we need to do to really support them in this journey? You mentioned earlier that people are experiencing burnout. And I think that's one of the themes that we picked up also through our COVID series of surveys that we ran during the earlier period of lockdown. People say that I'm starting to get tired, and the boundaries between work and home are becoming blurred. And I think it's important for us as an organization to know that, so that we can put certain measures in place to support our employees and continue to be there. Yeah, so I think there's a lot more that I can say, but from a timing perspective, I think maybe that's a good point to end off. I hope that answered your question.
No, that's wonderful. Cecile, thanks so much. Good insights there. And it really reconfirms once again that, relevant EVP is essential. And what was, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you need to, and not reinvent everything, but you need to fine tune what can still exist and what's still relevant and what needs to be added into that basket of well-being tools. So being mindful about that, and then respecting the fact that every employee comes from a different environment as well. So what might work for one person might not necessarily work for another. Absolutely. So tailoring the EVP around that specific profile of individual within the organization. So thanks, lots of food for thought there, really appreciate it. Okay, Chantal, being the Chief Learning Officer, as I said, is a massive portfolio on its own. And obviously, a lot has to do with the manner in which leaders carry this through. How are you finding the talent land? What are your biggest challenges for leaders at the moment? Because obviously, as I mentioned, managing virtual teams is quite a big factor. And how are you equipping these leaders from Momentum Metropolitan in weathering the storm and being able to adapt their whole leadership capability in terms of managing these remote workers?
Right, thanks, Celeste, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, reflecting on this session this morning again, what COVID brought was not just uncharted waters. It's really a situation where leaders, we don't have the answers. There's no textbook recipe for how to deal with this. And as an L&D practitioner, that was my greatest challenge. How do we respond? How do we equip and enable our leaders if the answers aren't there? So to answer your first part of your question, Celeste, I think what leaders are struggling with, and we've also seen it within the Momentum Metropolitan space, is really the fact that I can't engage my employees face to face. We're a very relationship-based organization and culture, and I think leaders feel that if I've seen my employee and I've engaged with them, there's a sense of energy of being together. I've done my job as a leader. And it now leaves you feeling, if I don't see them, they're working remotely, digitally, what is my contribution then as a leader? There's the dichotomy also of a bit of fear of the productivity levels of my people. Are we still being productive versus burnout? So it is that dichotomy where, as Cecile mentioned, you mentioned, Celeste, people initially worked so hard for various reasons due to the lockdown to start, I think, saying this is the worth I can bring to the organization, even though I'm not at the office, etc. But then, as I said, the balance, now that it's tapering off a little bit, are my people being productive? So that's what they struggle with a little bit. And then I think there's this whole thing around connection at a deeper level. We find it meaningful as leaders to connect with our people, and it's difficult to do it digitally. It's not impossible, but I think that sense of connectedness and purpose and meaning is so difficult to replicate when you're not sitting in front of somebody. I read an article the other day that said what happens post the adrenaline rush. You can Google it, the article is there. Is really to say that we all operated on total adrenaline during this period. So what now? We spoke about the new world of work 2 years ago already, but this is now a topic that's really important. This is a new world of work, and how do we navigate that? So McKinsey did a lot of research. It was published in July already about the new competencies of leaders that they require. I don't think they are so different to what we needed in the past. I think how we go about demonstrating those competencies are going to be different. So they talk about ability to function in a very digital environment, which we understand, and I think it's jumped upon us even more speedily because of COVID. But again, not new, but how do we engage it? How do we build curiosity amongst our leaders to actually work digitally? If I have to put my L&D cap on, how do I learn in the flow of life? Is the new buzzword for L&D. How do I sit on my couch and learn by just Googling something or reading an article and just getting my skills and competencies aligned to what's required in a very meaningful and an easy way, and simplicity is key there. Another key skill that they're talking about is cognitive. And again, we are aware of all of this: creativity, problem solving, and ability to manage large projects digitally and with your people not being in a project team. So again, I think my answer to all of those competencies and many more would be for leaders is going to be key, the energy that you bring into the workplace. It is an energy of saying we are connected to a greater organization, especially in an organization where various business units function independently. So what is the greater good of this organization? And I think a key skill is going to be to bring hope to your employees as leaders. What is the meaning and the purpose of all of this? And there is hope. And sketching that and reminding our people of exactly that and taking them along on the journey. I must also say that we shouldn't underestimate the resilience of our leaders. I've seen now within our organization, people just manage to start Zooming and working with technology they've never worked before. They just pivoted to become a new type of employee and engage the workforce differently. So although we're saying we need to prepare and upskill, I think there is that ability to actually step up to the plate and be resilient. I've seen a lot of that happening. And then just to close off how we responded really from a Momentum Metropolitan perspective in equipping our leaders is just being very agile, making things simple, giving people access to consumable pieces of information. We, for instance, designed a site where we had 6,500 leaders accessing the site when we launched it within the first week. So there is a need for our leaders to consume data in small chunks of information, like what do I do if I have to have difficult conversation and the person's not sitting in front of me. We're enabling them in that manner. And as I said, the uptake is great. And then finally, in terms of leadership development, we managed to pivot a lot of our programs in a short space of time. And I think the vendors that you work with is very important, or the partners that you bring on board, because they have the experience also in terms of virtual learning, especially if you work with international faculty. And I believe that many organizations have put those programs on hold. And I'm very proud to say that we actually pushed through. 120 leaders at various layers of the organization finished their leadership journeys that we embarked on pre-COVID. So I think it is really just thinking differently about how we express those competencies, as I said, as opposed to reinventing the wheel totally. So yes, I think that's a good place for me to pause as well.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thanks for that share, Chantal. It's wonderful, and it's commendable that your leaders carried through with their leadership journey. I think what I'm taking out of this is the fact that everything was in place, and you've basically almost like manicured the, for want of a better word, manicured of your leaders that much more. And I think it's really about ensuring that the relevance continues in order to ensure that they are prepped for the future post-COVID as well. So not to excuse the pun, but keep the momentum going and ensure that, you know, you don't lose hold of that, because you're obviously doing something very right there. I think a lot has to also be said about the future DNA of your leaders that you will recruit into the organization moving forward, because your whole profile of individual in terms of a leader and their capability and competency has also changed because of what COVID has brought about. So yeah, I think very, very good food for thought, and in terms of virtual leadership. Thank you for that. Wonderful. So Lynn, over to you. And you've obviously, you know, you've got your work cut out for you in terms of looking after these people on the front line and ensuring that you're attracting and the right human beings that can actually interface with your customers. And my question to you is really about, you know, I'm very curious to know what the talent landscape is saying to you at the moment. What are the discussions around the availability of skilled talent in that? And is there not a reluctance to your passive work seekers, or not work seekers, but your passive candidates not wanting to move out of their roles because they so enjoying the security and stability of what they have in place at the moment, Lynn?
Celeste, thank you, and good afternoon to everyone who's joined this webinar. So like you rightfully say, my work is cut out because the Metropolitan business is made up of just over 2/3 sales workforce, and just about under a third of the employees enable the distribution function, the sales function. So I just want to start off by saying that pre-lockdown, we operated fully as a face-to-face business, going out into work sites, going out to meet clients. That's how we operate. Even our recruitment is really a face-to-face recruitment. So if I'm hiring for any senior role, I will fly out to Joburg, to Durban, to meet with people face-to-face. So we are quite fully a face-to-face business. So what happened is that pre-lockdown, fortunately, I think we were quite ahead of the curve in terms of enabling digital processes for our advisors in sales. So when we were catapulted into lockdown, the major focus for us was really just to ensure that everyone has the tools to do their work, their laptops are working, they've got enough data, but the processes themselves were mostly in place. But needless to say that adjusting to a virtual way of work for sales employees for a business that's purely face to face was a challenge. In spite of the fact that we had the right systems to enable remote work and remote recruitment and the like. Fortunately, we have quite a strong change management team and quite a robust learning team. So the two teams were really able to assist us with the transition. So unlike many other organizations, we didn't stop recruitment at all during lockdown. But however, our strategy and our approach to recruitment evolved, obviously to meet the demands of the changing landscape and the digital recruitment, training, onboarding, that all changed and impacting our ways of work. I'm quick to say that I think the talent landscape in South Africa has some real gems. And unless you tap into that landscape, into the talent in South Africa, you won't know. And I've grown to appreciate the talent landscape because, I mean, just when lockdown hit us, I was busy looking to recruit for 3 senior roles, but also we didn't stop recruiting for our advisors. And there's a willingness from the talent in South Africa to give back to South Africa. And what's interesting is that a lot of really highly skilled people are attracted to what Metropolitan is doing currently around enabling financial life goals for the emerging markets. So there is a willingness to join our brand because of what we are offering to communities, but also because a lot of people that know us know that in terms of our digital processes with our sales advisors, we were ahead of the curve. And really the thinking was strategic because nobody ever envisaged lockdown, but our thinking was right to start digitalizing the Salesforce world, which is generally face-to-face in all the brands, financial services brands across South Africa. So looking at recruitment, we have a twofold approach for recruiting the sales and the non-sales employees. So maybe I'll start off sketching out what we do with the non-sales employees. So with lockdown, one of the very first things we did was to formulate a gig workforce strategy. And really because we started really being looking critically at our costs. We didn't want recruitment to add to our costs because of the COVID impact. And we also were very clear that we didn't want to expand our workforce unnecessarily until we had a clear picture of what how COVID would impact our organization. So in this gig force workforce strategy, we have three components of gigging. So we have contracting, which is one of the most common approaches. Contract workforce, they come in for a month, for 6 months, or a year on a contract basis. But also the second leg or second approach is freelancing. And I've seen that this is really something that we've started expanding on. And the last one is crowdsourcing, which we've just started dabbling into. We haven't done a lot of work around crowdsourcing, but that's definitely an approach that we want to take, especially with our new Get Up environment, which is digital, young workforce targeting millennials. We know that we'll get really good input from crowdsourcing and freelancers. So the South Africa market, as we speak, I mean, we know there is high unemployment rate. And so there are lots of skilled people who are willing to be freelancers, especially the younger millennials. They don't want to be tied down by work contracts that they can't do the work that they enjoy. So you find that our strategy now, the gig workforce strategy, is already in effect, and we have giggers, especially in the creative roles. So your design roles, the creative space, the writing space, and we also have a few international contractors, especially in the IT world. But I'm quick to also say that we're not looking to grow currently the international gig workforce base. And I say that because I believe that South Africa has the right talent, and it is our duty in terms of where we are as an economy to support skills development and nurture our own homegrown talent. So Metropolitan wants to participate in creating meaningful work for South Africans. So I think that's as much as I'll talk to the gig workforce strategy. But I mean that there's opportunity, massive opportunity. We've had really great talent raising their hands to say we're willing to do a 6-month contract, we're willing to come and do a design project for you and then move on. And especially with the younger talent. And then secondly, we've also adopted for our internal, or what we call indoor non-sales staff, role consolidation for all vacancies. So our first step is not to advertise a role, but our first step is really to look at the opportunity, look at our talent bench, and consider possible talent who could possibly be reskilled or upskilled. We have to grow our own talent first. I mean, our EVP in Metropolitan specifically, our strap line is your growth matters. And our growth, we're looking at holistic growth, but part of it is really to ensure that people find meaningful work, right? We find that some skills we needed, like stamping letters to clients or dispatching letters, are not as critical now. We're going digital. But how do we, instead of letting go of those employees, look to see how we can upskill them differently and how we can place them in roles that they would possibly not have gotten had we not been pushed really by COVID into becoming more digital. So we are looking at, we are on a journey currently to look at our customer journey, but also thereafter look at the capabilities and skills that we need for the future to deliver on our strategy. So part of that work is going to be input in how we start looking at roles that we need to consolidate and how we really look at, firstly, internal talent. And we're not going to bring external talent unless really we say that it's a transformation opportunity, but also we really don't have the skills, and upskilling our own will take a long time. So we're trying to balance, internal focus versus the external talent market. And then lastly, with our sales workforce, with our non-sales, is that we with some senior roles, we're recruiting externally. But what you find is that our EVP has also become more flexible. You know, with work from home, Cecile and her team have helped us with a specific proposal around options that we can consider. I have a colleague pre-COVID who always said, Lynn, work is an activity, not a place. And now we've seen that work really is an activity, not a place. People are able to work from home. So that also means that we are more relaxed as Metropolitan about where we find talent. Our main office is in Cape Town. So we used to look at indoor, specifically indoor talent or people needed to sit in Cape Town pre-COVID. But really, we all know that it's no longer the case. We've all been working from home since March. So where someone sits, as long as they're in South Africa, really doesn't matter. So for us specifically, it was a challenge to then find African Black female talent based in the Western Cape. Um, but now we've adopted the hybrid approach to work from home and, you know, part office, part at home, and it's enabled us to spread our wings. I've just recently appointed a senior person, Joburg based African Black female, because there's definitely talent in South Africa, and we need to really become more flexible with our policies around people, because there's scope for growth for us as Metropolitan to attract and accommodate talent through our customized EVP. And then lastly, I'll touch on our sales staff recruitment. So most of our recruitment, you'd appreciate, is focused on the sales workforce, because on average, we hire 180 people every month. So for now, I mean, in the past, we it was fully face to face. We've got recruiters in the different provinces, but we've transitioned. I mean, there is no way we could continue recruiting face to face in lockdown. So we've transitioned to Zoom and Teams interviews, but we are also exploring digital platforms like Warmly to assist us with recruitment. So there's a huge drive from Dieter and the team to assist us with looking at systems that can help us to really enhance digital recruitment, because we're not going back face-to-face recruitment. So if we are focused on acquiring talent that are digitally savvy, because we're going to make sure we've ensured that our training, our onboarding is all virtual. We have to ensure that our systems work for our good. And in that same breath, I'll also say with the digital recruitment, we've also overhauled our whole training, because it was also face to face. And it was a first of its kind in Metropolitan. Recently, I was asked how our transition to digital learning is different from what all the other companies have done. And we always refer to a model which we say that usually when there's a change, people move from survival to stability to significance. But I believe that we're not just surviving. We changed our model, it became fully digital, but we literally transitioned straight to significance, because not only are we getting better engagement in our virtual classes, but also that even the results of the new advisors, their performance is better than any of our face-to-face classes. Our retention has significantly improved since April, because we literally have embraced Zoom and WhatsApp learning, and also deploy a lot of our material through pre-recorded podcasts, videos, and e-learning. So I really am talking about training advisors on their mobile phones who come from the emerging market, you know, whilst ensuring that data usage is kept in check, but really just seeing this success in terms of embracing digital ways of recruitment, onboarding, and training. So really exciting work that we're doing in Metropolitan. But on the
That's
overall,
wonderful.
um, our strategic focus is really to reskill our workforce for the future. And I mean, the future is not in the near distant future. The future is now. And also to ensure that our workforce remains change resilient, adopts digital skills, so that we remain relevant in the market. So I think that's
Wonderful.
about it.
That's fantastic, very insightful. I'm sorry to have to cut you off. I could sit and listen to you for the rest of the afternoon, but time is always the enemy when it comes to webinars like this. So I appreciate that input. Very, very valuable.
No problem.
You've really highlighted the massive shift when it comes to talent acquisition in the marketplace. You've touched on all those relevant points. So I think, Dieter, just in pulling this all together in terms of your team from a sort of group human capital executive perspective, there's obviously, these trends are influencing the whole organizational culture within Momentum Metropolitan. And the biggest question is, how do you keep all these people connected? I mean, it's wonderful to hear the work from home and the digital connection and how it plays a role in everything. But, whether it's full-time or whether it's hybrid, how are you actually keeping these remote workers connected?
Perfect. Thanks, Celeste, and good afternoon, colleagues. I think the easy thing about going last is that I can summarize what a lot of you have already mentioned around the things that we are doing. But I think, Celeste, when we start talking about organizational culture, for me, there's 5 key points that we have to get right and that we're currently busy with from a Momentum Metropolitan point of view. The first one is, how clear are we around what we believe who we are as an organization culturally? Because if we can't define that from a purpose point of view, we will never be able to connect people to who we are as a brand. Now, whether that is if they work physically for us, whether they work in the remote environment, we have to be very, very clear around what are the principles pertaining to who we believe we are as an organization and what that looks like. I think the second key point there is, if we are clear around those principles, how does that translate into work? And I think Cecile spoke a lot about, the employee experience and where work happens. We talk a lot about flexibility, we talk about a hybrid workforce, but can we optimize the employee experience to actually create meaningful and memorable moments? Something that people think about to say, but sheesh, that is why I work here. This is what it's about. And that's why it matters to me. Chantal mentioned the word meaningful. Meaningful in this particular context is around, work has become something so fully integrated in the rest of our lives, and even more so pronounced now that it happens at home, is sheesh, those hours that you spend in front of the Zoom room or the Teams room has to be meaningful, has to matter. And how do we help employees understand why they matter in the context of our bigger purpose? I think the third piece there was definitely around then the mindset shift that, the new normal is the new normal. It's not temporary. And we found that a lot of people initially, and I think Chantal also referenced, that adrenaline rush, there's certain things that we have to start putting in place for the sustainable longer term. And an example there is around social connection and collaboration will now look different. The way we used to work around collaborating together is now going to be very different. So how do we use our office spaces in future differently? How do we think about an office as not a place to go to work, but a place to go to collaborate, or a place to go to connect, or a place to go to be able to check in with colleagues and still build that personal connection? And if that's not possible, what are the routines and the rituals that we have in the digital environment that allows us to do that? With my team on a Friday morning, we've got a set meeting at 9 o'clock that it can be about absolutely anything but not work. We've played quizzes, we've met the family, we've done things like that. And that's important because now, the family is part of the workforce. And that was a key message that we wanted to land as part of that. I think the fourth thing there is around leadership. So when we talk about leadership, Chantal mentioned a skill set shift. And I think what we are talking about is, yes, don't throw, the baby out with the bathwater. There's some new skills that we need to learn for leaders. I think the biggest shift is a mindset shift that leaders need to make. That element around the old model of I walk around, walking around by being visible. How do you really connect to people and make your connections meaningful? It's not about the amount of connections you have, but are they meaningful and are they direct and are they clear? So there's a lot of work there around how do we communicate and how do we actually help people to be productive in that particular space, and starting with leaders, because if we can't change their mindset, leaders will never be able to lead in a different way. So how do we help people connect just from a leadership point of view, and do that differently. I think an interesting thing in the leadership domain is during COVID, we spoke a lot about empathetic leadership. How do you meet your people where they are at, realizing that you are also going through this? Nobody's gone through COVID before. So as a leader, have a bit of grace with yourself, have a bit of grace also with, the people that you are leading. However, don't cross that boundary that you breed learned helplessness. What I mean by that is that we get to such a point that people expect everybody else to pick up the mantle and don't empower your people still to do and make the decisions that they used to make. And it's a very fine line that we need to get right. And culturally, for us as an organization, it's important. If we're going to trust people, and you mentioned that out of the research, to be productive and work anywhere, anytime, we need to be able to understand what that means and what that looks like, and empower them to be able to work in that particular way. And I think the last thing is almost, and I think the word is often used incorrectly, but the word heart set, is how do we still make sure that in our organizational story, in our organizational narrative, in every single interaction that we have with our people, there's something that inspires them to believe in our future. I think we run the risk at the moment of workforces being a little bit pessimistic. It's also October, November, which is usually a time when people are quite tired. However, this year it's been, I think just highlighted, and Cecile mentioned, from a burnout perspective. How do we still create that inspiration that people can hope about the future, dream about the future? Because long term, at the moment, this year has been next week. And that's not going to suffice in terms of the organization we want to build for the future. So we spoke a lot about in our human capital space, and it's some terminology that we've introduced into the broader organization around, we want to be an organization that thinks human first. And we want to make sure that we translate that into every practice, every policy, every engagement, every interaction, so that when we recruit, and Lynn used a couple of good examples there, we think about what's the human being in that particular process, and how do we engage and connect with them in that particular moment. When we write the policy, we had to also adapt our policy environment in terms of remote working policies and things like that. How do we think about the human being in that particular interaction? Because we believe fundamentally through that care, we will create a culture where people will want to connect to us, and will want to remain connected and engaged as part of where we need to be. So I think maybe, Celeste, to summarize from my side, I think it's be clear on what you believe, make sure that's translated into real experiences, help your leaders to think differently about how they're going to enable their workforce, regardless of where they work and how often we connect. I think the fourth one is there to make sure that we start seeing things as permanent and not as temporary. And the last thing is really, how do you create a heart set that engages and that inspires? And those are the kind of focus areas that we have currently. Practically, yes, Chantal's and team is engaging in a lot of leadership-based conversations to make that happen. Cecile and team and Lynn and team is engaging a lot around how do we shift and flex our employee value proposition to make that real, and to make that an actual experience that people can hang their hat on. And then I think lastly, how do we adapt our own people practices to support this new way forward, as opposed to keeping us stuck in an old frame of mind.
Wonderful. I think, Dieter, you've summed it up so beautifully. And I think what you've also hit on here is the fact that you need to think human first. We tend to, we need to obviously acknowledge the fact that IT and digital it's the enabler, but don't lose sight of the fact that it's the people that it's enabling. So think people first, and the engagement and every single process, which I love what you say, needs to actually be people-centric, and define what is the driver and define who is driving that in terms of the human capability. So you can have all the technology in the world, and I've had stand-up discussions and arguments with people before where it's human versus technology. You can't have one without the other. And it's the vehicle. Technology is it's the vehicle to enabling that human, the human first. So thanks for that. I think, Shimane, I don't know if there's any questions that have come through. I think we've got a very quiet audience today. I don't know if, I hope you're finding it all very constructive, and I think there's huge food for thought here. So I think we've got about 6 minutes left. So if there's any questions, please, fire ahead. So I don't think there are any questions, and I invite you. You've got my email address, you've got my contact details on that. If anything comes to mind after this discussion, because there's a lot of food for thought from every discipline and from every leader, if there's anything that comes to mind that you think, wow, I'd love to align my organization according to what Lynn or Dieter or Cecile or Chantal said, oh, I'd love to pick their brains a little bit further in this regard, because I think it's something our organization would like to adopt. Please reach out. That is the whole purpose of, paying forward in terms of the South African community and listening to these success factors that have come through. So to this wonderful team of panelists, thank you very much for giving of your time. I appreciate it. And anything else from your side in closing?
Yeah,
Lynn,
I think
is there
thank you very
anything from
much.
your side? No? All good? Chantal,
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful.
So much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Celeste. Thank you, team.
Only a pleasure. Thanks
you.
very much. Enjoy your
Thanks.
afternoon further. Bye now.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.